Today, all three contestants have gathered for the grand finale of the small tablet showdown. Before we begin, a few things to clarify. First, we have to set aside the issue of price for now. After all, Redmi is indeed quite aggressive in that regard. If we factored price into every aspect, the G brand probably wouldn't stand a chance. It's more appropriate to discuss this point at the end. Second, by the time this episode is completed, it's likely that there will be new OTA updates for these devices. However, due to cost constraints, it's obviously impossible to redo the entire review. So please take this into consideration when referencing the information. Third, it's impossible for a video to cover every single detail, especially when multiple products are being reviewed in a single episode. The good news is, there's definitely no fluff here. I firmly believe the content included will be enough to help you make an informed decision. So let's get started and have some fun. First, since all three are small 1610 tablets, their shape, size, weight, and how they feel are pretty much the same. When you hold them, there's no fundamental difference. At this level, no clear winner, but still worth discussing and comparing. So, in my personal opinion, when it comes to how impressive they are, the Red Magic is undoubtedly the standout. As mentioned earlier, it packs in the most features, has the largest screen and the highest screen-to-body ratio. Plus, the camera doesn't protrude at all. Even though its overall dimensions are slightly bigger than the other two, and it's heavier by about 30 to 40 grams, its solid, compact build and strong gaming vibe still make it truly remarkable. Next, in terms of practical value, I would choose Lenovo. The 16:9 body shape presenting a 16:10 screen is simply a stroke of genius. It doesn't just keep the top and bottom bezels. Instead, both sides are made into ultra-narrow bezels. When held vertically in one hand, it's truly unmatched. At the same time, the slightly elongated part due to space constraints actually creates a visual sense of closure. In the end, regardless of the actual measurements, as long as you hold it in your hand, it will always feel as if this is truly the smallest one. Only Lenovo ensures a smooth, comfortable feel from edges to corners, enhancing horizontal grip. Despite the slight seesaw effect, its practical value is maximized. Finally, when it comes to the absolute size and dimensions, Redmi takes the lead. Perhaps due to its market positioning and the need to appeal to the widest range of users while avoiding potential criticism, you won't find any bold or distinctive design choices or hidden hints on this device. Overall, it even exudes a faint sense of Apple-like minimalism and blandness. That said, to be fair, it is indeed universally practical enough, and among the three is the least likely to encounter issues in different scenarios. In short, though the camera bump is pronounced, it doesn't reach the screen-to-body ratio of the Red Magic, and its battery capacity is 1% smaller than Lenovo's. But the absolute numbers provide a safety net no matter. This one is the slimmest and most compact among them. Alright, after all this rambling, I wonder which one do you guys prefer based on your first impressions? Feel free to leave a comment or join the discussion in the chat. Although all of these screens have a 16:10 aspect ratio and similar sizes, so in theory the experience shouldn't differ much, in reality, the Red Magic's extra 0.26 inches and higher screen-to-body ratio make it feel noticeably more expansive compared to the Redmi. And when compared to the Lenovo, it definitely stands out as a true large display. Combined with a customizable aspect ratio for flexible display, even though, as mentioned in previous videos, not all games will necessarily gain extra field of view after adjustment, overall, it's still undoubtedly the best experience. As for Lenovo, it's worth adding that this device is quite unique. Although due to its asymmetrical design, it can sometimes make the viewing experience feel a bit constrained. However, holding the same screen horizontally or vertically, whether physically or psychologically, it's surprisingly much more relaxing and stress-free, genuinely offers comfort. Leaving aside the front camera for now, among small tablets, placing it on the side like a PC or keeping it at the top like a foldable phone. In other words, which logic is more suitable for real-world all-scenario use? Anyway, if you're gaming while on a video call or live streaming, only the Red Magic can guarantee your face stays visible, and no matter how many fingers you use to operate it, nothing will block your face. As for vibration, although both use dual X-axis motors, the actual effect is quite different. Typing on the Redmi system feels fine, with clear feedback for each keystroke, and the force during gaming is quite strong. But strangely, taking PUBG Mobile as an example, the vibration doesn't match the rate of fire on screen when you empty a magazine. The vibration only feels like 50% of what it should. Lenovo's vibration is powerful, but in the system UI it's a mess no sense of feedback or segmentation. In games, it delivers a sense of impact but feels a bit too muddled. As for Red Magic, there aren't any obvious issues. PUBG Mobile's advanced vibration is supported, but the vibration feedback is weaker compared to the other two.
Red Magic's vibration is more pronounced in the system UI. In the system UI, its vibration is slightly weaker than Redmi and Lenovo, but in the system UI, it's slightly stronger than Redmi and Lenovo.
Redmi and Lenovo's vibration feedback in the system UI is slightly weaker, while in the system UI, it's slightly stronger than Redmi and Lenovo.
Among the others, only Lenovo supports expandable storage, and only Red Magic, due to architectural limitations, lacks a side-mounted end interfaces, is also its biggest hardware limitation this time. To put it simply, none of the interface features are truly perfect at the moment. The only difference is whether they can meet your specific needs. In actual transmission speed tests, Lenovo is the fastest and also has good compatibility, followed by Red Magic, and finally Redmi. But even so, under ideal conditions, you can still get at least around 300 megabytes per second, which is more than enough for normal needs. When it comes to gaming, Red Magic is definitely the top choice if it can handle it, nothing else can. Redmi has a strong ecosystem and advanced brand technology. For example, if you use Xiaomi or Redmi phones or computers, this is your only choice, it works more smoothly. The biggest highlight for the others, in my opinion, is the wireless secondary display, which is almost like reverse input. Only Redmi has this feature built directly into the system, allowing you to turn it into an extended display via Wi-Fi, and it's compatible with both Windows and Mac platform. Lenovo is actually not bad either, but like Redmi, it still doesn't go deep enough. For example, although both of them have PC modes, when it comes to screen mirroring, they don't offer a virtual touchpad or wired screen-off mirroring. On the other hand, Red Magic, which doesn't even have a PC mode, provides all of these features: virtual touchpad, gamepad, and screen-off mirroring. All of them are equipped with large symmetrical speaker units for external audio, but to be honest, the sound quality isn't as good as you'd expect. For personal listening, Red Magic has a typical smartphone sound scattered thin with high frequencies, making it sharp. Redmi likely has the most balanced sound across the three frequency ranges, aiding vocal clarity and working well with most music, though it might not stand out as captivating. Lenovo boosted low frequencies, so if you like something similar, it really reflects a fine flat spectrum. Under the light, the Red Magic reflects more in the blue and purple wavelengths. From a direct viewing angle, it actually performs quite well, but as soon as you shift the angle even a little, it falls short. The gray appearance, overlaid with rainbow patterns, is far less deep and pure than the other two LCD's blacks. Turning on the screen, first regarding resolution. Although last time I mentioned that the Red Magic's real RGB arrangement doesn't show any obvious loss compared to LCDs at the same PPI and actually performs quite well, the fact remains that the Redmi and Lenovo have significantly higher resolutions. Their PPIs are both around 400, while the Red Magic at best only reaches about 300. To the naked eye, that's at least a 25% decrease. So as you can see in the footage, the absolute clarity just can't compare to the other two. It's not as sharp or crisp. Personally, I still hold the same opinion. Next time, Red Magic should at least bring the PPI up to around 350 for a smoother experience. To the naked eye, the biggest issue with the LCDs on the Redmi and Lenovo is light leakage and shadowing, especially if you're already used to OLED. Whether it's the intense glow of a pure black screen at maximum brightness, or the patchy, mottled look of a pure white screen at minimum brightness, both can be quite jarring, constantly exuding a kind of old-school torment. Of course, if you happen to be someone who's fond of this kind of retro vibe, just pretend I never said anything. Interestingly, if you think about it, further setting aside the shadowing for a moment and just looking at the light leakage, if you pick either one and flip it horizontally, the distribution patterns almost overlap, as if it's hard to say there's no connection between their origins. Of course, Red Magic fans shouldn't get too excited. E-Tremble patterns can also take you on a reverse journey time, letting you experience a simplified version of the classic square film effect. Additionally, under normal low light conditions, fine, but when you manually set the brightness to the lowest, instead it has a unique charm, reminiscent of simulated LCD light leakage. In brightness, starting from the back, Redmi has the lowest overall brightness. There's no significant difference between max manual full screen brightness and peak brightness. Only the central area reaches 600 nits, averaging 560 to 570 nits. With a 10% HDR window, peak brightness reaches about 750 nits. Next, Lenovo's average max manual brightness is 650 nits, and with high brightness mode, it reaches 800 nits. Finally, Red Magic, being OLED, easily outperforms LCDs. Its uniformity is at least twice as good as the other two, though its power consumption is higher. There's little difference between Redmi and Lenovo. Theoretically, excluding margin of error, they're basically the same at the same brightness. As for flicker, although Red Magic uses high brightness DC dimming and an ultra-high 5280 Hz frequency at low brightness to minimize flicker, it's still at a disadvantage compared to LCDs, which inherently don't flicker. That said, in default mode at a dim 10 nits, its blue light performance might actually be the best among the three. Lenovo and Redmi are basically the same thing, since at this point their spectra don't show any significant differences either. As for color, the devices are being serviced, and rattling off numbers for these three gadgets under dim lighting doesn't seem meaningful to me. After all, if you care about this, the iPad is definitely the top choice. Why bother with Android? So, to speak frankly from a personal perspective, if I have a choice, I'd definitely go with OLED. Regular LCDs on mobile devices just feel a bit too retro to me. At the same time, even though Red Magic has advantages when it comes to brightness, uniformity, contrast, and even response speed, I can't say for everything, but for LCDs, it's still got a solid edge. It has several advantages for everyday movie watching and gaming, and is generally more appealing. Of course, for die-hard LCD fans who can't use OLED, there's really little difference between Redmi and the Lenovo in my opinion. There's no substantial distinction. If you're after relatively richer and more vibrant colors, go with the Lenovo. But if you really insist on absolute accuracy, alright, nothing else matters, so Redmi is definitely the most reliable choice. So at this point, which one would you choose out of the three? Feel free to leave a comment or send a bullet chat to let me know your answer. Focusing on the materials, let's take the highest settings in Honor of Kings as an example. The Red Magic and Redmi are about the same, both around 240 Hz. The highest is Lenovo, but this one is a bit special. With this board, it's actually hard to say exactly how many Hz it should be. Out of 10,000 samples, the results fluctuate wildly. If we go by the lower end, it could be considered 310 Hz. On the higher end, it could be 400 Hz, with the average being roughly around 360 Hz. Interestingly, perhaps because of this, Lenovo also has the lowest estimated touch delay, followed by Red Magic, and finally Redmi. From my personal experience, all three are about the same. You might think the Red Magic looks a bit weaker in the video, but that could just be due to the display, since it has the lowest resolution, which makes the visuals appear relatively larger. So it's very likely that their response logic is actually the same. Before performance tests, two clarifications. First, manufacturers hide internal temperature readings to avoid user anxiety. Snapdragon hides CPU temp, Dimensity hides all. So following test temperatures refer mainly to GPU and battery temps of Lenovo and Red Magic, not Redmi. This is because obtaining those readings is almost impossible. Second, Red Magic's internal circulation cooling system. We discussed this. Today, all tests use internal circulation at highest speed, not noticed separately. Don't assume it's performing poorly. In the 30-degree thermal stress test, I have to say Lenovo really didn't disappoint. Even though you can't manually enable performance mode for this, they've thoughtfully set up a whitelist, allowing for a sustained average output of 13.3 watts aggressive and impressive. It even makes Red Magic's awakening mode, which is capped at 11.4 watts, seem a bit lackluster by comparison. But before Redmi could shout out in awe at Lenovo's prowess, Mr. Red Magic interjected. Since you all don't seem to understand what real tuning is, I happen to know a thing or two myself. In a blink, the god of destruction possessed him 15.3 watts, instantly cleared the field, sweeping everything overwhelming and unstoppable. Overall, among the three, Red Magic is still undoubtedly the wildest in terms of performance output. It can withstand a 30 degrees Celsius ambient temperature with nearly double the output of Redmi, and its ability to crush the sealed Lenovo model into the ground under pressure is truly top tier for its generation. Without external cooling, enabling this mode isn't recommended. It's more for show than practical use. For everyday needs, the standard performance mode is enough. As for Redmi, since its target user base is broader in a strict sense, it may be more concerned about avoiding complaints about overheating than about pursuing extreme performance. Therefore, the default temperature control, especially for the GPU, is set a bit tighter, which is understandable. High power mode lasted only 3.5 minutes, with average power not even reaching 8.2 watts. The tablet form factor provided no significant boost. Performance is very similar to their previous smartphones with the same Dimensity processor. As a result, temperature remains very low. The average temperature of the 5 hottest spots on the surface is only 41 degrees. In this regard, because there is always at least a 2-watt difference in power consumption between Red Magic and Lenovo, it's difficult to directly judge which one has better thermal performance. However, one thing to note is that under the effect of internal circulation, Red Magic does tend to expel heat more efficiently, and the heat is highly concentrated in the motherboard area. As a result, whether you measure the front or back, or take the average of the hottest spots on multiple surfaces, strictly speaking, Red Magic ends up at a slight disadvantage in the final presentation, because basically, in a 32-degree environment, the hottest spot can even break through 65 degrees Celsius in the 015 Reals W Destruction God mode. The general temperature control range for the front and back panels is actually about the same as Lenovo's 13W mode, with not much difference. At the same time, the GPU and battery are also lower by 1.1 degrees Celsius and 2.4 degrees Celsius respectively. To be fair, next we'll average the 5 hottest spots between Red Magic and Lenovo during gaming. Friends, it's best to pay attention to the left and right bezels, as they might better reflect the actual feel in hand. At 32 degrees, after half an hour of playing Honor of Kings at the highest graphics settings, theoretically speaking, if we only look at frame rates, it's no surprise that Red Magic is the smoothest, followed by Lenovo and then Redmi. But the difference is really very small if you're not being picky. Saying they're the same wouldn't be much of an issue. So, considering power consumption and temperature, Redmi has an advantage here. It only used less than 5.4 watts. The average temperature at the hottest spot on the back was only 39 degrees Celsius. Lenovo's biggest issue in this firmware, performance mode lacks adaptive capability. This makes people mistakenly think playing Honor of Kings always takes 9 to 10 watts and gets extremely hot, but in reality it's just mode selection. Setting aside the level of performance release, Whether in terms of actual results or the tuning itself, there's really no significant difference between balance mode and beast mode. Here, choosing the former is the right call. And in that case, it only needs 5.8 watts. Overall, in almost every aspect, it's nearly identical to the Red Magic, though if you really nitpick, the Red Magic still comes out slightly ahead. Aside from a more stable frame rate, the average temperature of the left and right bezels is 0.5 degrees Celsius lower than Lenovo's, and the internal GPU is also 0.6 degrees Celsius cooler. At the same time, as can be clearly seen from the thermal map, although the Red Magic's design isn't strictly a true end-to-end motherboard, its performance actually surpasses that, making it more comfortable to hold. One last interesting observation perhaps, because both use end-to-end motherboards, Redmi and Lenovo show remarkably similar patterns and locations of surface heating on the device. In many ways, it makes me suspect that Redmi might be borrowing a bit too much from Lenovo's design. At 30 degrees Celsius with Genshin Impact at highest graphics, both devices perform surprisingly well at 1080p. Though average power consumption of 6.5 W isn't lowest, frame rate and temperature performance are genuinely impressive. With a solid full frame rate, the average temperature remains at 39 degrees Celsius, about the same as Lenovo's balanced mode at 6.1 W, and 2 degrees lower than the Red Magic at 6.3 W. Among the three, it is undoubtedly the best overall performer. Lenovo's problematic performance modes become apparent here. Balanced mode lacks power, with 1% low at less than 31 FPS, while Beast mode releases too much power, pushing nearly 8.1 W, leaving users at a loss. To align the frame rates for comparison, we can only use the Beast mode as an example here. Lenovo's back temperature averages 2 degrees higher than Redmi, similar to Red Magic. Its side frames are also 1 degree higher, GPU 9.2 degrees hotter, and battery 3.7 degrees higher. Unfortunately, it still doesn't outperform any of them. In the stress test, Redmi was the first to hit its thermal limit, and during the final golden moment of the map, its performance was so restricted by temperature control that it couldn't even compare to the other two. However, considering that only this device here uses a MediaTek processor, it seems reasonable to switch the default graphics API in the game settings to Vulkan, which MediaTek handles better. As you can see, even though the 1% low at the end still drags down the average after switching, the overall frame rate is on a whole different level. With an average power consumption of nearly 8.8 watts and the lowest device surface temperature remaining completely unchanged throughout, it's undoubtedly quite competitive, even when compared to other gaming tablets. The Red Magic's frame rate is flawless and it's noticeably smoother than Lenovo's. The good news about the temperature is that, thanks to an average power consumption that's 0.6 watts lower and internal circulation cooling, this is better than the CPU is 2 degrees cooler than Lenovo's, and the battery is 1.6 degrees cooler. But as you might expect, the bad news is that heat doesn't just disappear, it all ends up on the surface of the chassis. The hottest spots on the chassis average 4 degrees higher than Lenovo's, and both sides are 1 degree hotter. In summary, it's impressive, but it does run a bit hot in comparison. To be honest, the situation doesn't look too good for Lenovo as temperatures can't compete with Redmi, and its frame rates can't beat Red Magic. So this 10.2 watts is hard to justify. Of course, looking on the bright side, if you count frame rates, it beats Redmi across the board, and in terms of temperature, it can go head-to-head with Red Magic. Wouldn't that make it the most well-rounded and balanced option? I wonder which of the three do you guys prefer in this round? Finally, at the peak moment, let's also try out the legendary Ming Dynasty mode. Still at an ambient temperature of 32 degrees, with all graphic settings maxed out. The route is based on the discussions among the folks in our group. The map is set at Capitol Hill after Zone 7, starting from the highest point in the city and heading downward, focusing mainly on flying close to the ground, with some running and point capturing as a supplement. Each lap taking 10 minutes, repeating this cycle 3 times. Red Magic achieved a crushing victory, delivering an almost unbelievable stable frame rate with the lowest average power consumption at 9.8 watts. Excluding motherboard interference, the device's temperature matches Lenovo's at 11.7 watts, but the internal GPU is 11 degrees cooler, and the battery is 3 degrees cooler, the chosen one of its class. So what's going on here? It turns out that due to the physical resolution, although Red Magic defaults to point-to-point rendering, its actual resolution is at least 20% lower than the other two, which means it's under significantly less stress. But of course, when it comes to real-world performance, unless you deliberately count the pixels, I honestly couldn't tell any difference. Anyway, that's just how it is. Redmi and Lenovo set their rendering resolutions too high. Even though the former pushes up to 10.5 watts, the frame rate is still disappointing, with only the temperature being notably low. The average around the device is just 42.5 degrees Celsius. The latter barely holds on at 11.7 watts, but it doesn't seem to make much of a difference. To be fair to them, I decided to give them another chance. I manually lowered the resolution by 1 notch in the game settings, switching to a high-quality mode similar to the Red Magic, and ran the test again. As you can see from the results, both Redmi and Lenovo did show some improvement in frame rates, but they still couldn't reach the level of the Red Magic. Smoothness order: Red Magic first, then Lenovo, then Redmi. Redmi's temperature stayed the same. Lenovo's overall temperature dropped about 1 degree. Its internal temperature was still much higher than Red Magic's, but GPU dropped 5 degrees. battery too. As for the Red Magic, the biggest concern here might be the overall body temperature. But as mentioned earlier, if we consider the actual user experience, the average temperature on both sides of the device is only about 1.5 degrees Celsius higher than the lowest, which is Redmi. So, unless you hold the phone upside down or insist on pressing directly on the motherboard while playing, the difference in how it feels is not really noticeable. In charging though, brands claim different power ratings 67W, 68W, even 80W actual charging speeds are similar, with peak power around 60W. Average charging power for Red Magic and Lenovo is 35W, while Redmi is slightly lower, about 33W. This means that although it still takes an hour for the UI to show a full charge from 0 to 100%, the Redmi is indeed a bit slower during the process between 15 and 45 minutes. Red Magic is the fastest, followed by Lenovo. Red Magic leads in battery capacity with an estimated 7,500 mAh UI full charge, followed by Lenovo at 7,400 mAh and Redmi at 7,100 mAh. However, Red Magic's 8,200 mAh full capacity requires the longest trickle charge, an extra half hour. Additionally, perhaps due to tuning, the extra few hundred milliamp hours in the Redmi don't actually make a noticeable difference in battery life compared to the other two. In my personal experience, the battery life of all three is about the same. Alright, to sum up, if you have a generous budget and prioritize gaming-related experiences, then among these, the Iris Gaming Tablet 3 Pro is clearly the best choice. It offers the most plug-in versatility, the best performance output, and the OLED screen can also deliver outstanding visuals comparable to those on smartphones. Redmi is undoubtedly the best value for money. Although its maximum performance output isn't as high, under normal conditions it doesn't lose out to gaming-grade devices. And in many cases it even has an advantage in terms of temperature control. Plus, with its excellent overall versatility and the traditionally affordable price, I honestly can't think of anything to criticize. It's really impressive. That said, some game emulators may not be as compatible with the Dimensity chip as they are with Snapdragon. If you have such requirements, you might need to consider this further.
As for the vendor Lenovo, even though they entered the market the earliest, they don't seem to have built a sufficiently deep moat. Even the plastic screen bracket was only just removed in this latest model.
So when faced with competition from both sides, they end up somewhat stuck in an awkward position neither here nor there. Aside from a good feel in the hand and support for expandable storage, its gaming performance doesn't stand out, and its system experience is the simplest among the three. It might be more suitable for those who have time and are willing to tinker, and in the short term, third-party support is a bit better. I'm curious how you all view the relationship between these three. Who would be your final choice? Feel free to leave a comment and share your thoughts. Okay, that's all for this video. Thanks for watching. I'm Dashush. See you in the next episode.